Are you curious about how much it costs to through hike the Appalachian Trail? If so, I've been geeking out on the numbers and I'm going to share them with you. Alright, so if you're wondering how much it's going to cost when you through hike the Appalachian Trail, I could share with you the numbers from my trip, with the caveat that my trip was not the ordinary through hike. In fact, I got 1,800 miles in out of the 2,190, so I didn't quite finish. I've got about 400 more to do this summer. But I did do my best to keep track of almost every penny that I spent on the trail. And I've done the work, and I've got some numbers that I can share with you just to give you an example of how a budget might shape up for a through hike. First of all, I was gone for 33 weeks, just shy of 7 months. That's a little bit longer than average. Most people finish the trail in 5 to 6 months. So the longer your trip is, the more that you're going to spend. Now, I also had a lot of foot issues, and in fact, I spent a total of 9 days off the trail just taking care of my foot, and that was in 3 separate times that I had to get off the trail. Those times were spent in a combination of hostels and hotels, and of course that also meant meals in town, so that bumped up my expenses a bit. I took one trip to Florida to visit my mom. She was having heart valve replacement surgery, which was pretty serious, and so I got off trail for 5 days for that visit. And then I also was home 3 separate times, once in June for 5 days for my future son-in-law's citizenship. So that was a big family celebration that I had planned before I left on my trip. I knew that was going to come, but I initially was thinking that'd be about a 3-day trip, and it turned into a 5-day trip, so a little bit longer than I planned. And then I was also home twice in October as I was wrapping up, and you may or may not be aware that I did what I call a 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐸𝐾 hike. So I started out going northbound, but I ended up jumping ahead twice. Once after my mom's surgery, I left Harper's Ferry to go to Florida, and then I jumped up to New York. So that was one big jump that I made. And then another gap that I had was jumping from Bennington, Vermont up to Hanover to meet Mudbug to hike the Whites and Maine together. And so I had 2 gaps, and then that also meant that I had gaps to fill at the end of the trip, so I had additional travel expenses as I went southbound to start filling in those gaps. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as I get into travel expenses. So to run down the totals, I spent, drum roll please, I'm not proud of this, $10,925. Now, when you break it down, I did average just over $1,000 a month for actual on-trail expenses. $2,252 was on expenses for travel, getting to and from the trail, the trips home, the trip to see my mom. So a big chunk on unanticipated travel expenses took a bite out of my budget. That left me with about $8,600 in on-trail expenses over those 33 weeks. That was an average of $1,084 per month for, if you round it up to 7 months. So probably about $1,100 a month versus the $1,000 a month that I had hoped that I would be spending. Now, I have some charts I will bump up here for you. You can see the one that is my total by month, and there are a couple months where my expenses spiked. They went way up in May, back down in June, even though I went home in June, and then again in July and August. And I looked to see what those extra expenses were from. Turned out that those were the months where I bought shoes and also some other gear. So my shoes were about $140 a pair, so that's a big dent in the budget for each one of those pairs, and I bought 3 pairs while I was on the trail. I also ended up buying a new stove while I was in Hot Springs, and also new camp shoes while I was in Hot Springs. So the stove was $45 and the shoes were about $80, so again, not inexpensive. The other gear items that I had to replace, and I had a total of about $1,100 in gear over the course of the trip. I bought 4 different bite valves. I seemed to go through those, what felt like, pretty quickly. A couple of them didn't work out, and I went back to the original brand and it turned out better. 3 pairs of shoes, 3 sets of insoles, because I replaced my insoles when I replaced my shoes, 3 pairs of hiking socks, and also 3 pairs of 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐸𝐭 sock liners. Now, some of the biggest categories in my budget, in addition to travel, were things like lodging. If you can spend a lot of time on the trail, like physically on the trail in shelters or camping, you're going to save a lot of money. Because I was on and off the trail so much, I had a lot more expenses both for hostels and for hotels. So here's the breakdown. I spent $2,386 on lodging. 30 nights I was in a hostel. That was $1,148. So it was an average of about $38 a night in a hostel, and that does include my laundry expenses. and I'll talk about those again in just a minute. There were 14 nights that I was actually in a hotel or in a B&B instead of a hostel, so that was $1,091. The average there was $68 a night, so you can see almost double what it costs to stay in a hostel. Hostels are much cheaper, and I took out of the average one night that in Hanover I had to spend a night in a hotel, which was $200, very expensive, but I had a business issue that I needed to take care of, and so I really had to stay in a hotel to get that squared away, to have good internet access and that sort of thing. So I took that out of the average, making it $68 a night for hotels. So there were also some nights that I spent camping. Instead of staying on the trail, I actually paid for camping, and those were in Shenandoah National Park, at Trent's Grocery, and a couple of other places. The total cost for that was $142, an average of just $850 a night. So even camping off trail is much cheaper than staying in a hotel or staying in a hostel. I did have some expenses during trail days for an RV site that I shared with my brother and sister. They came up to visit with me for trail days. That was about $74, and I took that out of the average of the $850. It would have skewed the average, so I took that out. My hostels tended, and you may have heard that hostels get more expensive the further up the trail you go. The range was from about $20 a night up to $45. $45 was actually the most expensive hostel, and that was Hostel of Maine. The cheapest was the Blackburn AT Center, which was a donation-based hostel, and you could go into a donation-based hostel and pay nothing, but really it's courteous to at least leave something, and their recommendation was $10, so that's what I gave them. And then also laundry. Laundry very often you can do when you're at the hostel, and sometimes it's included in the charge and sometimes it's an additional fee. It averaged about $5 a load, and I would say I did laundry probably about every 6 days or so, depending on when I was in town. And the most expensive laundry was also at Hostel of Maine. That was $10 a load. Before that, the most expensive was I think about $7 or $7.50. But yeah, Hostel of Maine kind of was off the charts in terms of laundry. But everybody else, you know, it was anywhere from $3 to $5 a load, and you could split it with somebody and reduce the cost. Laundry was not terribly expensive at all. Now, sometimes you do have to buy detergent. Sometimes it's provided and included in the cost. Now, what about food? Oh man, you know, you get the hiker hunger and you end up starting to eat a lot. I had friends who spent easily probably $40 or $50 on their resupplies. Mine averaged about $24, and I spent maybe $50 on fuel. I bought a can of fuel every 3 weeks or so, and that only cost about $5. So I included fuel and toiletries in my resupply expense. So food, fuel, and toiletries were at my resupply about $25 a week. In total, that added up to $1,435 for food that I made, snacks and that sort of thing. I also spent a lot of money on food in town, which, oh man, we all love to fantasize about it. Always craving the burger, the Reuben sandwich, the milkshake, whatever I could get my hands on. I spent just over $2,300 on food and also drinks along the trail, and sometimes that was, I was treating somebody as well, so it wasn't all for me, but probably 98% for me. That averaged out to 114 meals, so about $20 a meal on average, which isn't really bad for a restaurant meal. Now, I did find that restaurants along the trail were much cheaper than they are in a town like Atlanta, where I live, where it's very hard to go out for less than $20. Some places you could get a wonderful meal for $10 or $12 plus tips. So food actually was very affordable. I ate a lot of it. I sometimes would eat 2 meals when I was in town, 2 meals at one time when I was in town, and you know, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and it kind of adds up. So a lot of money spent on restaurant meals and cocktails and things like that, that, you know, if you're really on a tight budget, you could certainly pare that down and eat more of your own food and save a good amount of money right there. Now, travel expenses, oh my goodness. Travel expenses include, you know, for me, getting to and from the trail, which I had a lot of because of the hopscotch approach and the trips home and that sort of thing, and also travel along the trail. So shuttles, and you know, you can take Lyft in some places to get from the trail to town, that sort of thing. I tried to be conservative, and if I was going into a hostel, I might pick one where the shuttle to and from the trail was included. A couple times I hitchhiked, but not very often. I know some people hitchhiked a lot to save on shuttles, but I spent $750 on those types of shuttles along the whole distance of the trail. And that also included gas that I gave to trail angels. There were a few people who drove me around. My cousin's husband drove me around all over Maine, spent some gas for him, and then also when other trail angels picked me up, I would also offer them gas money just as a courtesy for a thank you for them picking me up. So $750 over the course of 33 weeks for me seemed pretty reasonable. What got me in terms of expenses was the airfare and train and taxi and buses to get around, both going north and south and home. The total expenses for that kind of travel was $2,252. The airfare at $897 was the biggest expense, followed by car rental. I had 2 or 3 different times that I rented cars, and then gas and shuttles. The train fare was really remarkably affordable, as was the bus fare. I took buses in Vermont to get around, $2 a trip, really, really affordable. So public transit, when it's available, is a great bargain. So what did I spend in other categories? ATM fees were about $3 a month. Entertainment, that included a couple movies that I went to and some other side trips, sightseeing, that sort of thing. That was about $13 a month. Medical expenses, this includes things like ACE bandages, ibuprofen, that kind of stuff. I put that in a separate category because I was having so many issues with my foot. It included ankle braces, knee braces, that sort of stuff. It was $14 a month on average. Shipping, that was getting gear, sending stuff home, having boxes sent to me, since I did do some resupply boxes, and that was about $25 a month, primarily through the U.S. Postal Service. And I talk about that in my resupply box video, which you might be interested in. I did buy some alcohol and carry some on the trail, not a lot, but I spent about $32 a month on alcohol. My favorite, which I'd never even had before the trail, was Fireball, and I got home and my husband was laughing at me because I said, can I go out and buy some Fireball? I want some trail nostalgia here. Transportation, I talked about on average, my on-trail transportation worked out to $107 a month. Gear, $162 a month. Actually, as I said, that was more gear than I expected. I thought my gear would hold out pretty well, but there were a few things that had to be replaced. The resupply, as I mentioned, about $24–25 a month. That comes out to $24–25 a week. It averaged to $205 a month. Meals in the restaurants were $329 a month. Again, that's a great opportunity for savings if you're trying to spend less on the trail. And lodging was $341, which is another good opportunity for savings if you're trying to squeeze your budget and get by on, say, maybe $700 or $800 a month for your trip. So I hope that information is helpful to you as you're planning your budget. And as I said, my trip had some anomalies in it. It wasn't the average through hike, and I spent more than I expected because of that. But if you can get straight through, if you don't have major health issues that slow you down or detour you, then you can probably get by, I would say, easily with $1,000 a month. $700 to $800 I think would be kind of the low end of the comfort zone. And if you got more than that and can afford to spend $1,200 to $1,500, you could have a very nice leisurely luxury hike if you'd like. So anyway, if you have questions, or there are any other stats that you're curious about in terms of my own numbers, please pop them down in the comments. I'd be happy to take a peek and see if I can share those numbers with you. And I hope you enjoy your next hike. Take care.